The Battle of Khe Sanh was conducted in Khe Sanh of northwestern Quảng Trị Province, Republic of Vietnam, between the 21st of January and the 9th of July 1968. During the Vietnam War, the belligerent parties were elements of the United States military 3rd Marine Amphibious Force, 1st Cavalry Division, the U.S. 7th Air Force, 1st Battalion, 9th Marine Regiment, minor elements of the South Vietnamese Army against 2 to 3 division-size elements of the People's Army of Vietnam. The American command in Saigon initially believed that combat operations around the Khe Sanh Combat Base during the summer of 1967 were just part of a series of minor North Vietnamese offensives in the border regions. That appraisal was altered when it was discovered that the NVA was moving major forces into the area during the autumn and winter. A build-up of U.S. Marine Corps forces took place and actions around Khe Sanh commenced when the Marine base was isolated. During a series of desperate actions that lasted 5 months and 18 days, Khe Sanh Combat Base and the hilltop outposts around it were under constant North Vietnamese ground, artillery, mortar, and rocket attacks. During the battle, a massive aerial bombardment campaign was launched by the United States Air Force to support the Marine base. Over 100,000 tons of bombs were dropped until mid-April by aircraft of the U.S. Navy, Air Force, and Marines onto the area surrounding Khe Sanh. This was roughly 1,300 tons of bombs dropped daily, 5 tons for every one of the 20,000 NVA soldiers initially estimated to have been committed to the fighting at Khe Sanh. In addition, 158,000 large-caliber shells were fired on the hills surrounding the base. This expenditure of aerial munitions dwarfs the amount of munitions fired by artillery, which totals 8 shells per NVA soldier believed to have been on the battlefield. The campaign used the latest technological advances in order to locate NVA forces for targeting. The logistical effort to support KSCB, once it was isolated overland, demanded the implementation of other tactical innovations in order to keep the Marines supplied. In March 1968, an overland relief expedition was launched by a combined Marine Army, South Vietnamese task force that eventually broke through to the Marines at Khe Sanh. American commanders considered the defensive Khe Sanh a success, but shortly after the siege was lifted, the new American commander in Vietnam, General Creighton Abrams, decided to dismantle the base rather than risk similar battles in the future. Historians have observed that the Battle of Khe Sanh may have distracted American and GVN attention from the build-up of Viet Cong forces in the South before the early 1968 Tet Offensive. Even at the height of the Tet Offensive, General Westmoreland maintained that the true intentions of the offensive was to distract forces from Khe Sanh. On the 19th of June 1968, another operation began at Khe Sanh, Operation Charlie, the final evacuation and destruction of the Khe Sanh combat base. The Marines withdrew all salvageable material and destroyed everything else. The NVA continued shelling the base, and on the 1st of July launched a company-sized infantry attack against its perimeter. On the 9th of July 1968, the flag of the Viet Cong was set up at Ta Con Airfield. On the 13th of July 1968, Ho Chi Minh sent a message to the soldiers of the Route 9 Khe Sanh front affirming the victory at Khe Sanh. It was the first time in the war that the Americans abandoned a major combat base because of enemy pressure. Preliminaries. The camp, the village of Khe Sanh, was the seat of government of Hong Hoa District, an area of Bru Montagnard villages and coffee plantations, situated about 7 miles from the Laotian frontier on Route 9, the northernmost transverse road in South Vietnam. The badly deteriorated Route 9 ran from the coastal region, through the western highlands, and then crossed the border into Laos. The origin of the combat base lay in the construction by U.S. Army Special Forces of an airfield in August 1962 outside the village at an old French fort. The camp then became a Special Forces outpost of the civilian irregular defense groups, whose purpose was to keep watch on NVA infiltration along the border and to protect the local population. As early as 1964, Westmoreland described Khe San's possibilities. Khe Sanh could serve as a patrol base blocking enemy infiltration from Laos, a base for SOP operations to harass the enemy in Laos, an airstrip for reconnaissance to survey the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a western anchor for the defenses south of the DMZ, and an eventual jumping-off point for ground operations to cut the Ho Chi Minh Trail. In November 1964, the Green Berets moved the camp to the XOM Cham Plateau, the future site of KSCB. During the winter of 1964, Khe Sanh became the location of a launch site for the highly classified Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, or MACVSOG. For their reconnaissance teams were launched into Laos to explore and gather intelligence on the NVA logistical system known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail. By 1966, Westmoreland had begun to consider Khe Sanh as part of a larger strategy. "I still hoped someday to get approval for a major drive into Laos to cut the Ho Chi Minh Trail," he said, "in which case I would need Khe Sanh as the base for the operation." In a meeting with Lt. Gen. Louis Walt, commander of III Marine Amphibious Force, Westmoreland said that he placed great strategic importance on Khe Sanh. He believed it was absolutely essential to hold the base, which explains why he then ordered Marines there. In September 1966, Military Assistance Command Vietnam began detailed planning for an invasion into Laos, and an airfield was built at Khe Sanh in October. The plateau camp was permanently manned by the U.S. Marines during 1967 when they established an outpost next to the airstrip. This base was to serve as the western anchor of Marine Corps forces, which had tactical responsibility for the 5 northernmost provinces of South Vietnam known as 1st Corps. The Marines' defensive system stretched below the demilitarized zone from the coast along Route 9 to Khe Sanh. During 1966, the regular Special Forces troops had moved off the plateau and built a smaller camp down Route 9 at Lang Vei, about half the distance to the Laotian border. Border battles during the second half of 1967, the North Vietnamese instigated a series of actions in the border regions of South Vietnam. All of these attacks were conducted by regimental-size NVA/NLF units, but unlike the usual hit-and-run tactics used by the People's Army forces, these were sustained and bloody affairs. In early October, NVA intensified battalion-size ground probes and sustained artillery fire against Con Thien, a hilltop stronghold in the center of the Marines' defensive line south of the DMZ in northern Quảng Trị Province. Mortar rounds, artillery shells, and 120 22mm rockets fell randomly but incessantly upon the base. The September bombardments ranged from 100 to 150 rounds per day, with a maximum on the 25th of September of 1,190 rounds. The American commander in Vietnam, General William C. Westmoreland, responded by launching Operation Neutralize, an aerial and naval bombardment campaign designed to break the siege. For 7 weeks, American aircraft dropped from 35,000 to 40,000 tons of bombs in nearly 4,000 airstrikes. On the 27th of October, a NVA regiment attacked an Army of the Republic of Vietnam battalion at Song Be, capital of Phoc Long Province. The North Vietnamese fought for several days, took casualties, and fell back. 2 days later, the 273rd NLF Regiment attacked a Special Forces camp near the border town of Loc Ninh, in Binh Long Province. Troops of the U.S. 1st Infantry Division were able to respond quickly. After a 10-day battle, the attackers were pushed back into Cambodia. At least 852 North Vietnamese soldiers were killed during the action, as opposed to 50 American and South Vietnamese dead. The heaviest action took place near Dak Tu, in the Central Highlands province of Con Tum. There, the presence of the 1st NVA Division prompted a 22-day battle that saw some of the most intense close-quarters fighting of the entire conflict. American intelligence estimated that somewhere between 1,200 and 1,600 North Vietnamese troops were killed, while 362 members of the U.S. 4th Infantry Division, the 173rd Airborne Brigade, and ARVN airborne elements were killed in action. Nonetheless, 3 of the 4 battalions of the 4th Infantry and the entire 173rd were rendered combat ineffective during the battle. American intelligence analysts were quite baffled by this series of enemy actions. For them, there appeared to be no logic behind the sustained NVA-NLF offensives, other than to inflict casualties on the Allied forces. This they accomplished, but the casualties absorbed by the North Vietnamese seemed to negate any direct gains they might have obtained. The border battles did, however, have 2 significant consequences that were unappreciated at the time. They fixed the attention of the American command on the border regions, and they drew American and ARVN forces away from the coastal lowlands and cities. In preparation for the Tet offensive fights, things remained quiet in the Khe Sanh area through 1966. Even so, General Westmoreland insisted that it not only be occupied by the Marines but that it be reinforced. He was vociferously opposed by General Lewis W. Walt, the Marine commander of 1st Corps. Walt argued heatedly that the real target of the American effort should be the pacification and protection of the population, not chasing NVA and the NLF in the hinterlands. Westmoreland won out, however, and the 1st Battalion, 3rd Marine Regiment was dispatched to occupy the camp and airstrip on the 29th of September. By late January 1967, 1/3 was relieved by Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines. A single company was replacing an entire battalion. Prados argues that one of the mysteries surrounding the Battle of Khe Sanh was why, after running roughshod over the Marines concerning the defense of the base at Khe Sanh, Westmoreland allowed the drawdown. But Wider explains that Khe Sanh objectives of interdicting NVA infiltration through Laos were negated as the base was completely surrounded. Furthermore, NVA's General GIP claimed that Khe Sanh itself was not of importance, but only a diversion to draw U.S. forces away from the populated areas of South Vietnam. On the 24th of April 1967, a patrol from Bravo Company became engaged with a NVA force of unknown size north of Hill 861. This action prematurely triggered a North Vietnamese offensive aimed at taking Khe Sanh. The NVA forces were in the process of gaining elevated terrain before the launching of the main attack. The 2nd and 3rd Battalions of the III Marine Regiment, under the command of Colonel John P. Lanigan, reinforced KSCB and were given the task of pushing the North Vietnamese off of hills 861, 881 north, and 881 south. North Vietnamese forces were driven out of the area around Khe Sanh after suffering 940 casualties. The Marines suffered 155 killed in action and 425 wounded. In order to prevent NVA observation of the main base at the airfield, the hills of the surrounding Khe Sanh Valley had to be continuously occupied and defended by separate Marine elements, thereby spreading out the defense. In the wake of the hill fights there was a lull in NVA activity around Khe Sanh. By the end of May, Marine forces were again drawn down from 2 battalions to 1. The 1st Battalion, 26th Marines, Lieutenant General Robert E. Cushman, Jr. relieved General Walt as commander of 3 MAF in June. On the 14th of August, Colonel David East Lones took over as commander of the 26th Marine Regiment. There were sporadic actions in the vicinity during the late summer and early fall, the most serious of which was the ambush of a supply convoy on Route 9. This proved to be the last overland attempt at resupply for Khe Sanh until the following March. During December and early January there were numerous sightings of NVA troops and activities in the Khe Sanh area, but the sector remained relatively quiet. A decision then had to be made by the American High Command. Either commit more of the limited manpower in First Corps to the defense of Khe Sanh or abandon the base. General Westmoreland regarded this choice as quite simple. In his memoirs he listed the reasons for a continued effort. Khe Sanh could serve as a patrol base for blocking enemy infiltration from Laos along Route 9, as a base for SOG operations to harass the enemy in Laos, as an airstrip for reconnaissance planes surveying the Ho Chi Minh Trail, as the western anchor for defenses south of the DMZ, and as an eventual jump-off point for ground operations to cut the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Leading Marine officers, however, were not all of the same opinion. General Cushman, the new 3 MAF commander, supported Westmoreland. Arguments offered by other Marine officers against remaining included that the real danger to First Corps was from a direct threat to Guam Tri-City and other urban areas, that a defense would be pointless as a threat to infiltration, since NVA troops could easily bypass Khe Sanh, that the base was too isolated and that the Marines had neither the helicopter resources, the troops, nor the logistical bases for such operations. The weather was another critical factor because the poor visibility and low overcasts attendant to the monsoon season made such operations hazardous to say the least. Brigadier General Al English complained that the defense of the isolated outpost was ludicrous. When you're at Khe Sanh, you're not really anywhere. You could lose it and you really haven't lost a damn thing. As far as Westmoreland was concerned, however, all he needed to know was that NVA had massed large numbers of troops for a set-piece battle. Making the prospect even more enticing was that the combat base was in an unpopulated area where American firepower could be fully brought to bear, without having to worry about civilian casualties. The opportunity to engage and destroy a formerly elusive enemy that was moving toward a fixed position promised a victory of unprecedented proportions. NVA was acutely conscious of his position, as he voiced that opinion publicly in the press.